So the person who was supposed to come in place of me is a good friend of mine. His name is Nagraj Adve. Would have been a fantastic speaker. He is also somebody who's worked extensively in this area. And since, I was just telling him, it's like, playing in a cricket field, in a match where Rahul Dravid suddenly is retired hurt. And they send somebody who's not even played in Ranji to bat for him, which is what is going to happen here. And essentially, let me begin with a very interesting booklet that he has written, which I'll recommend all of you to read, those who are interested in climate change. And he starts with a very interesting example. A few years ago, they had gone as climate activists to Gujarat. और वहाँ पे वो जाके जनरली बातचीत कर रहे थे, अपना सर्वे कर। कितना टाइम है वैसे मेरे पास? बहुत, अरे बहुत मत बोला करो, और खास करके जेएनयू टीचर्स को तो बिल्कुल ही मत बोला करो। तो उन्होंने वहाँ पे जब एक ऐसे ही सर्वे कर रहे थे, बातचीत कर रहे थे, कोई एकेडमिक आपकी तरह सर्वे करने नहीं गए थे। दे हैड जस्ट गॉन टू फाइंड आउट कि क्या लोग समझते हैं क्लाइमेट चेंज के बारे में। तो बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग चीज़ वो शुरू में ही लिखता है अपने बुकलेट में। अगेन मैं बोलूँगा बुकलेट इसलिए नहीं कि वो मेरा दोस्त है, लेकिन वो बुकलेट ज़रूर पढ़िए। उसमें वो जाके जब किसानों से पूछते हैं कि आप लोगों को क्या बदलाव लगा है पिछले कुछ लेट्स से सालों में, तो उसमें से जो किसान थे उन्होंने बोला कि एक चीज़ क्लियरली हम बोल सकते हैं, आज से 10 साल पहले जो था और आज में क्या अंतर है। और उन्होंने एग्जाम्पल दिया कि 2 ऐसे फसल हैं, गेहूं और गन्ना, नहीं नॉट गन्ना, सॉरी, मकई। गेहूं और मकई, ये 2 ऐसे क्रॉप्स हैं जिसके पिछले 10 साल में, विद इन अ डेकेड, the production has come down, the incomes from these 2 crops have come down, particularly for farmers who are dependent on, who don't have a well that they own, जिसमें पानी की जो दिक्कत है वो उन लोगों को। तो उन्होंने पूछा कि ऐसा क्यों है, तो उन्होंने बोला कि हम लोगों का ये दोनों जो फसल थे ये उगते थे ओस के कारण। आप जब ठंड में अभी देखेंगे जेएनयू में तो ओस इज ड्यू। सो dew has an important role to play for these crops. They are not, obviously they are not crops which need water. It's not rice, but they need dew. The moisture that these crops need come from dew. और उन्होंने बोला कि पिछले 10 साल में, just 10 साल में ये हाल हो गया है कि जिन लोगों के पास अपना स्रोत नहीं है इस तरीके से मॉइस्चर देने का प्लांट्स के लिए, उनके पास और कोई चारा बचा नहीं है। एंड देन they asked them कि आपको क्या लगता है ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है। तो उन लोगों ने एक सीधा सा एक आंसर दिया कि अब प्रकृति पे हम क्या कर सकते हैं। एंड टू which persuaded them to actually work in this area, and their point was कि सोचिए जिसके ऊपर इफेक्ट है, जो एक्चुअली सबसे गरीब से गरीब व्यक्ति है इस देश में। तो हम लोग कहते हैं ना कि ये फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड का प्रॉब्लम है, दिस इज नॉट अ प्रॉब्लम दैट अफेक्ट्स अस, एटलीस्ट नॉट एज येट। But the effect of this is actually happening much more to the tropical countries, which I'll come to just in a moment, compared to those who are actually responsible for it. But before I go into that, let me clarify, और इकोनॉमिस्ट होने के नाते ये 2 चीज़ें क्लैरिफाई करना मेरी जिम्मेदारी बनती है। इस पूरे क्लाइमेट इनजस्टिस के इर्द गिर्द जो चर्चाएं चलती हैं उसमें 2 कॉन्सेप्ट्स जो हैं बहुत इस्तेमाल किया जाता है, और वो दोनों कॉन्सेप्ट्स वैसे तो इकोनॉमिक्स से रिलेटेड है, और इकोनॉमिस्ट themselves are responsible for the mess that we are in, but उसको हम 1 मिनट के लिए अगर दरकिनार कर दें तो 2 कॉन्सेप्ट्स पे मैं थोड़ी बात रखना चाहता हूँ। एक होता है स्टॉक वर्सेस फ्लो, which I'm sure you have heard of, those who have worked in this area, that there's something called a historical stock of carbon versus those who are emitting, which is a flow. इस पे बहुत बहस हुई है, बहुत बहस चल रही है। इसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कार्बन ट्रेडिंग वगैरह वगैरह जो तमाम चीज़ें हैं वो इसी एक मुद्दे को लेके होती हैं। तो इसको मैं थोड़ा सा तफसील से, हालांकि आप लोग शायद जानते होंगे, लेकिन फिर भी एक एग्जाम्पल के तौर पे आपको समझाने की कोशिश करूंगा कि क्यों ये इंपॉर्टेंट है। एक ट्रिवियल सी बात है दैट stocks are nothing else but summation of flows. So you keep summing flows, it brings the stock. That's what. So every year's addition of flows goes to the stock, and the new stock is larger by the amount of flows that are there. So that's a trivial difference, so to speak. But why is it important in the case of carbon? Is because both play a very important role. So all those who are talking only of stocks and not of flows, or all those who are talking about only flows and not stocks, are both wrong. And that is why it is important to understand the difference, the importance of these two. Let me explain you why. If you look at stocks of carbon, unlike anything, unlike, let's say, stock of water, stock of money, stock of wealth, there's something particular. Carbon is a different kind of beast altogether. It's not dollar, it's not any currency, it's not money. It's something which stays in the atmosphere for 100,000 years. Can you imagine anything we emit today? Like whatever, anything that we use, this thing being played, the carbon that it is emitting is going to stay in the atmosphere for 100,000 years. 10% of that. If you think that, okay, 10% is not that much, 50% of this carbon that we emit today, that's the long life of carbon. It stays for about 1,000 years. That's why stocks are important. It's not as if that the Europeans emitted, let's say, 2 centuries ago or a century ago. It doesn't matter at all. It matters because of the fact that it stays for so long in the atmosphere. So then one would say that, okay, fine, but what about flows? Flows are not that, they are just additions. If there's a huge stock which already exists, then what are we doing? We are just adding a minor thing to that in terms of flows. But again, there is this, there is a trickery involved there. Just imagine, अगर मैं आपको एक उदाहरण दूं कि आपको एक लिमिट पहुंचना, एक रेस है जिसमें आपको 10 एक यूनिट है वहां तक पहुंचना है. आप रेस शुरू कर रहे हैं 1 से और दूसरा एक रेस शुरू कर रहा है 6 से, तो आप समझ सकते हैं अगर रेट ऑफ ग्रोथ दोनों का या दौड़ने की ताकत दोनों की बराबर हो, जो 7 से शुरू कर रहा है वो जल्दी पहुंच जाएगा. सो जस्ट ट्राइंग टू एक्सप्लेन टू यू, in a situation when you have a finite limit to carbon, let's say that you want to limit it to 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5, the debate that is happening around the 2 targets. So there's a limit to carbon to which we would have to reach to be able to control temperatures, right? In which case, if the base itself is large, which is what, let's say, China is currently, if the base is large, that 10% rate of growth, it may be the same as the United States, 10% growth in 1960. But that 10% is different because the base is much larger. Let me explain to you slightly differently, just to give you the difference of flow and stock. In the last 30 years, 50% of the carbon has been emitted compared to 3 centuries. So in all of the 3 centuries, the amount of carbon that has been emitted, last 30 years have emitted 50% of that. That is why it is important to talk in both terms of stocks and flows. And those who take side on either of the two, they may have their own political understanding about it, which I'll come to, but it is something that should be kept in mind. At least factually, these things need to be kept in mind. The other concept which is normally talked about is the per capita emission versus absolute emission. Again, an issue which has divided the world, which has divided the COP26. It has divided the negotiations for very long. And again, I think using, let's say, simple basic mathematics, you will have, arithmetic, not even mathematics. What is it? Absolute is nothing else but per capita multiplied by population. Now, what matters, as we've just seen, what matters is the absolute amount. It doesn't matter which of the two variables it comes from. The absolute can come from higher population. The absolute can come from higher per capita, or a combination of both. So to be thinking only in terms of per capita, or to be only thinking in terms of the other extreme, which is bigger population, so you are responsible, a problem such as this needs a combination of both. Why is it particularly important for a third world country like ours? You just think of it this way. You may have emitted a very, very minor proportion of carbon to, per capita emission, as the example that I just gave of the farmers. But its wrath that falls on you is not in terms of per capita. It's not going to look at, जब आपके ऊपर अगर मान लीजिए साइक्लोन आता है, तो वो ये चेक नहीं करेगा ना कि आपने कितना पर कैपिटा एमिट किया है, उस हिसाब से आपको अफेक्ट करेंगे. अफेक्ट तो सभी को करेगा. So a problem such as this to be boiled down to only in terms of per capita and population is something which obfuscates the main issue, which is so that was just to give you a background in terms of these two issues or these two concepts which are often used in discussions around climate change. Now comes the question of inequality. What exactly is the climate inequality we are talking about? I think the climate inequality can be seen at 3 different levels. one which is global, two which is more local, let's say national, and third, which is often not discussed, is the inequality between the human species and the non-human species. When we talk about equality, we normally only see it within the realm of human beings. We don't see it in terms of other non-human species who also cohabit the earth along with us. We don't look at their rights, their equality. None of that comes under generally, and definitely not of economists. I mean, if I was just looking at the Twitter account of this famous economist who's a Nobel Prize winner, Nordos, and he gave an example, a presentation in MIT which he shared, where he's saying the optimal path of growth for the world economy is when we reach 3 degree Celsius temperature rise. 1.5 is suboptimal. 1 degree is harmful as far as the optimality is concerned. So that is the kind of economics logic that one would find normally. But leave that kind of bogus argument aside, if we simply look at it in terms of these three forms. So he's not even considering, let's say, human versus non-human. He's not even considering that. But leave that paradigm aside. These are three different kinds of injustices that we see. To quantify that, let's say, and these are figures which you can easily look at, but still it helps to put numbers there. If you look at the global emissions, the richest 16% of the population, which is basically the EU and the G7 and EU essentially, which includes Japan, emits 2/3 of the carbon that we has emitted, not currently, but has emitted 2/3 of. So 16% of the population emits 4 times as much as their share in the population. And imagine the entire African continent emits only 3%, which is 18% of the population emits 3%, 16% emits 64% of the overall emissions in the world. So the kind of inequality that you have is so blatant and so clear. There was a report which said that even an extreme case where the richest 1% in the world emit twice as high as the bottom 50% of the population. So 50 लोग जितना emit कर रहे हैं उससे दुगना सिर्फ एक व्यक्ति emit कर रहा है अगर global scale पे देखें. So you can imagine the kind of inequality that exists in emissions. This, let's say, is at the global level. But when you come to a local, a more national, domestic level, in the case of India, if you were to study, which we have done, it shows that the richest Indian, and this does not obviously, it's based on National Sample Survey, which obviously does not sample the Ambanis and Adanis of the world. It only has, let's say, people who are lower, the rich in that sense are not truly represented. But even there, if you look at the emissions that they make, it's about 8 times as high as the poorest, sections of the population. Now, the question is that if this is the kind of discrepancy that you have, that the richest 10% of the population emits 8 times as high as the poorest 10% of the population, then any fight against climate injustice and inequality needs to essentially forefront the fight on injustice as well. It cannot merely be a fight on climate change alone. Now, if you combine the two, it's important to then see this fight as a fight which is against climate change and carbon inequality. It should not be seen as separate from each other, which is unfortunately how some of the frameworks or negotiations have have presented it as. For example, the carbon budget framework, something which has been under a lot of discussion in the backdrop of this of the COP26 conference. What does it say? It says that, some of you may know, but still, the total that you have of what is remaining, you need to split it in a way which is just. So if you've contributed in the past, which is more than your share in the population, we have now a right to, a higher share in the carbon. And that is the way you can actually right the wrongs that have been done in the past. So this is the carbon space. It will be budgeted according to the countries, according to their share in the population. You have emitted X amount, which is more than the population, which is more than the share of your population. So you have to cut down. We can increase because we have not emitted in the past. And the fallacy, as I've just said in the beginning, the fallacy of that in terms of stock and flow are important to see. The problem with that is, while it is interesting to understand the injustice in that form, to use it to argue that we have a right to burn is where the problem emanates. It's not, there's no doubt that there is an injustice. There's no doubt that historically it has been, entirely the first world which is to blame for. But to argue from there that it is now our right to burn. It's like saying, when you're, in nuclear disarmament debates, you say that, okay, we don't have nuclear weapons. You have made nuclear weapons. Since you have made nuclear weapons and we don't, now it is our right to make nuclear weapons, instead of arguing for nuclear disarmament. These are, I know it's an extreme. It's not the same thing, but as an analogy. This is exactly what one would be arguing for if one says that it does not matter what we do. What matters is only when the first world acts that we need to act. Until such time that happens, we have a right to emit. Now, one could have said that this is something, a perverse form of this is the carbon trading, where you have credits which you can sell. So it's a market solution. Some on the progressive sides have been arguing that, okay, you don't sell the credits, but there's something that you use. So you don't sell it outside, but you use it within your own economy. A framework which has been aggressively arguing for increased carbon space usage by the third world countries. I think that a truly just solution would require a combination of a fight against climate justice, against climate change, and carbon inequality. And that is something that I would like to end with, is that what can that constitute of? I mean, what can such a vision be which combines these two things, which does not look at only one aspect of it and leaves the other, or looks at only, let's say, the issue of inequality and does not at climate change, as the framework that I just discussed does. And I think there is a way to do it in terms of ideas. The way it can be done is you think in terms of a global carbon tax. Now, what does that mean? It essentially means that every country puts tax on carbon, and those countries which have contributed less historically on an average are the ones who get money from this pool of carbon tax. And those who have contributed more to the emissions, they are the ones who are. So there is a net payee, which is the first world countries, and there are net receivers, which are basically the third world countries, depending on where on that scale you are. Now, one could say that this is very idealistic, this is not going to happen, none of this is going to work out. Yes, it is true that it is actually in the realm of ideas alone, but it is. But look at COP26 itself. South Africa has managed to, although I'm not an expert on negotiations, but it has at least managed from the first world countries, not as an aid, but in terms of the commitment to a just transition within South Africa is something that they had negotiated. So it's not as if that these negotiations cannot happen. It depends on the political blocks that you can make. If you negotiate individually, you will not manage. If you negotiate collectively, just imagine if India and China were to negotiate today collectively in such a forum, obviously they'll carry a lot of weight in terms of these negotiations to, let's say, get the share that I've just mentioned. But let's say we keep that aside. We say that, okay, this is not possible. This is not going to happen. I mean, the rich of the global elite is not going to pay for the energy transition in the global south. It's impossible because at the end of the day, you're negotiating across states. So it's not so easy to have such negotiations in the framework of nation states alone. Then what do we do? Do we just, maintain status quo, do nothing about it, or do the incremental thing that we are doing in terms of the commitments that we make, or let's say announce things about 2070 which sound more like Jumla than reality, but all these things you can commit to without having to do much about it. Or you can think in terms of, just as this injustice which is global rich versus the global poor, there is also rich versus the poor within individual countries. If you were to do the exact same thing in terms of taxing the rich here, whether in terms of wealth tax, whether in terms of inheritance tax, neither of which exists in our country, that tax itself, it can be a huge amount which can more than pay for something that we have called an Indian Green Deal, which essentially constitutes of changing the energy mix of the economy. It includes creating jobs to the extent which covers for the unemployment rate that we have currently, because of the fact that the renewable energy sector is far more employment intensive compared to the coal sector. So the usual arguments that are made of not going towards renewable energy is that coal is far cheaper, coal creates more jobs, none of which actually stands correct today. Yes, it was correct 10 years ago, but not anymore. So if that is the case, what stops us from moving in that direction? And the only thing which can stop us perhaps is the question of finance. In terms of, okay, fine, we may have a good plan. It may be, something which changes the energy mix of the economy, all of that. But where is the money going to come from? Jo paisa usme kharch hoga, who is going to pay for it? And I think that payment, if the global thing doesn't work out, the argument that one makes of global tax not working out, there's a possibility of doing that domestically, and that possibility is not very difficult to understand. You can have two different ways in which it can be done. One is simple income tax. Income tax, by that I mean wealth tax or inheritance tax, what is called direct taxes in economics. You can simply do that, which does not affect the incomes of the poor, or you can actually additionally put a carbon tax within the economy. Now, yes, carbon tax is something which is, if you have to pay more for petrol, more for diesel, more for oil, more for coal, obviously it's going to affect everybody. And that's basically indirect taxes. But the point of that is indirect taxes are also, because of the rise in prices, is going to also curtail consumption of people of commodities which have carbon embodied in them. So there is that trade-off that you have there, a role that is going to be played in terms of controlling climate change to the extent possible through this redistribution or through increase in prices. But the effect that it may have on the poorer sections of the population because of rising inequality that it would give rise to, you can have a redistributive program. Redistributive in the sense that what people have called carbon taxes and carbon dividends. So you tax everybody, but then you divide the dividends per capita, in which case the poorer sections get higher than the taxes that they pay. A similar thing can be done in the case of India as well, not in terms of monetary dividends, but you can give people, the poorer sections of the population, free ration. You can give them free electricity up to a certain point. You can give them free access to public transport. All of these things have actually been done in cities. I mean, Delhi is a good example of that. You get 200 units of electricity free in Delhi. You get water free in Delhi. You get public transport free for women in Delhi. So these are policies which can be implemented, but the problem there is it has only been given in free. There is nothing compensating for it. There is no compensation that has taken place in terms of decreasing the consumption of carbon emitting commodities. It's the combination of the two which requires to be done. We need to address both the issue of climate change and of carbon inequality. Unfortunately, the discussions have either been on the issue of climate change or of carbon inequality, but ideas can be made, can be thought of, which combines the two. So the problem is not in the realm of ideas. The problem is in the realm of political will. And that's where I think the role that students or political organizations can play. And I hope that you guys, unlike our generation, when we were students, we thought climate change is nothing, and those who are talking about climate change are all talking bekar mein bakwas. But things have changed. Good that you guys are engaged on this issue, and hopefully you will be part of the larger movement on the issue of climate change. Thank you.